Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers to connection, they're the foundation for a meaningful and respectful life. Without them, chaos ensues. With them, order and purpose thrive. Today, I want to highlight 4 critical boundaries that every individual must set to live a life of integrity and fulfillment. The first and most critical boundary we need to discuss is the one you set with yourself. You must understand fundamentally that how you treat yourself establishes the framework for how others will treat you. This is where it all begins. It's not about being selfish, nor is it about being arrogant or overly self-assured. It's about defining the standards by which you live and refusing to compromise them for convenience, approval, or even affection. If you don't set the boundary of self-respect, the world will encroach on your time, your energy, and your sense of self until there's nothing left. So what does this boundary look like in practice? It begins with clarity. Ask yourself, who am I? What do I value? What do I want to achieve? Most people drift through life without ever answering these questions. They live reactively, constantly bending to the will of external pressures, rather than proactively defining the course of their own existence. If you don't know your values, the world will supply its own, and often they're values designed to serve someone else's interests, not your own. Setting boundaries with yourself means committing to a vision of your best self. It means deciding consciously how you will spend your time, where you will direct your energy, and what behaviors you will tolerate from yourself. You might think this is obvious, but consider how often people break the commitments they make to themselves. They say, I'll start eating healthier tomorrow, but they don't. They promise themselves they'll stop procrastinating, yet they binge watch shows into the early hours of the morning. They set goals, but abandon them at the first sign of discomfort or challenge. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you erode your sense of self-worth. It's as though you're telling yourself, I don't matter enough to follow through. The boundary of self-respect is not about perfection, it's about integrity. Integrity comes from the Latin word integer, meaning whole or complete. To live with integrity is to be whole, to have your actions align with your values. If you value honesty, for instance, are you honest with yourself? Do you acknowledge your shortcomings without making excuses? Or do you rationalize your failures, blaming circumstances, other people, or bad luck? Self-respect requires brutal honesty, but it also demands compassion. It's a delicate balance between holding yourself accountable and forgiving yourself when you fall short. Now, let's talk about what happens when this boundary is absent. Without self-respect, you become a pushover not just to others, but to your own impulses and weaknesses. You'll find yourself saying yes to things you despise because you fear confrontation. You'll let bad habits fester because the effort to change feels too daunting. And worse, you'll attract people who exploit your lack of boundaries. Why? Because people can sense when someone doesn't respect themselves. It's a signal, subtle but unmistakable, that says this person is malleable. They won't stand up for themselves, and let me tell you, the world is full of individuals and systems that are more than happy to take advantage of that. But when you set the boundary of self-respect, everything changes. You stop tolerating mediocrity, not just from others, but from yourself. You begin to demand more of your time and energy, redirecting it toward pursuits that matter. You develop a sense of pride, not the arrogant kind, but the kind that comes from knowing you've earned your own respect. This isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Why? Because setting this boundary means confronting your own inadequacies. It means admitting that you've allowed yourself to fall short and then doing the work to change it. That's painful. It's uncomfortable. But it's necessary. Here's the irony: when you respect yourself, others are more likely to respect you too. People are drawn to those who carry themselves with dignity and self-assurance. It's not about being perfect or pretending to have it all together. It's about exuding a quiet confidence that says, I know who I am, and I won't compromise that for anyone. This doesn't mean you won't face conflict, quite the opposite. People who are used to taking advantage of your lack of boundaries will push back when you start enforcing them. They might accuse you of being selfish or difficult. But remember this: their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself. Respecting yourself also means protecting your mental and emotional health. It means stepping away from situations, environments, or relationships that diminish you. This isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. Imagine trying to help others from a foundation that's crumbling beneath you. How effective could you be? By setting the boundary of self-respect, you ensure that your foundation remains strong, allowing you to contribute to the world in a meaningful way. So let me ask you, are you respecting yourself? Or are you letting your boundaries blur under the weight of excuses, fear, or complacency? If you're not respecting yourself, start today. Define who you are and what you stand for. Make promises to yourself and keep them. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because when you respect yourself, you set the stage for a life of integrity, purpose, and fulfillment. And that, my friends, is a life worth living. Time is your most finite resource. You can lose money and earn it back, lose possessions and replace them, but time once spent is gone forever. Yet, how often do we treat time as though it's abundant, as though we can afford to waste it endlessly? How often do we allow distractions, demands, and other people's priorities to siphon away the hours, days, and even years of our lives? Setting boundaries around your time isn't just about scheduling or being organized, it's about recognizing its value and protecting it fiercely. If you don't set boundaries around your time, you'll inevitably find it slipping away, squandered on activities and commitments that don't serve your purpose or goals. Consider how much time is lost every day to meaningless distractions. Social media is a perfect example. How many times have you told yourself, I'll just scroll for a minute, only to realize an hour has passed? It's insidious. These platforms are designed to steal your attention, to keep you engaged in a cycle of consumption rather than creation. And it's not just social media, it's emails, notifications, trivial conversations, and countless other interruptions that add up to an enormous waste of time. Every time you allow these distractions to take over, you're saying, this is more important than what I should be doing, but is it really? Protecting your time means learning to say no, and that's hard for most people. Why? Because saying no often feels like rejection of others, their ideas, their requests. People worry about seeming rude, unkind, or uncooperative. But here's the truth, every time you say yes to something that doesn't align with your priorities, you're saying no to something that does. You're saying no to your own growth, your own goals, your own well-being. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Now, setting this boundary requires a deep understanding of your priorities. What truly matters to you? What do you want to achieve? If you don't know the answers to these questions, you'll find yourself saying yes to everything because it all feels equally important or equally meaningless. Clarity about your priorities is the foundation for protecting your time. Once you know what matters most, you can begin to allocate your time accordingly, cutting out the distractions and obligations that don't align with your goals. Of course, this is easier said than done. Life is full of demands: work, family, friends, emergencies, opportunities. It's not about eliminating all these things, it's about discerning which ones deserve your time and which don't. This is where the concept of opportunity cost comes in. For every hour you spend on one thing, you're sacrificing an hour you could have spent on something else. Time spent mindlessly watching TV, for instance, is time you're not spending developing a skill, building a relationship, or working toward a meaningful goal. When you think about your time in these terms, it becomes much easier to set boundaries around it. Now, let's address the guilt that often comes with saying no or setting limits on your time. Many people feel obligated to be available to others at all times, to say yes to every request, to answer every message immediately, to attend every meeting or event. But this mindset is unsustainable. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If you're constantly giving your time to others without reserving any for yourself, you'll burn out. And when that happens, you won't be able to give your best to anyone, not your work, not your family, not yourself. Setting boundaries around your time is an act of self-respect. It's saying, I value my time and I will use it wisely. It's also a way of respecting others, because when you're intentional about how you spend your time, you can show up fully and meaningfully in the moments that matter. You're not just present in body, you're present in mind and spirit. Contrast this with someone who's always stretched too thin, rushing from one obligation to the next, unable to give their full attention to anything or anyone. Which approach do you think leads to a more fulfilling life? There's another aspect to this boundary, and that's learning to be alone with your time. Many people fear solitude. They fill every moment with noise, with activity, with company, because the silence is uncomfortable. But solitude is where growth happens. It's where you can reflect, plan, create, and recharge. If you're constantly giving your time away to others, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to connect with yourself. And that connection is vital for understanding who you are and what you want from life. Think about the great achievements in history. They didn't happen because people squandered their time on trivialities. They happened because someone somewhere decided to focus their time and energy on a purpose. They set boundaries. They said no to distractions and yes to what truly mattered. That's what it takes to live a life of significance. So I ask you, how are you spending your time? Are you letting it slip away, consumed by distractions and obligations that don't serve you? Or are you protecting it, directing it toward the things that truly matter? Setting boundaries around your time isn't easy. It requires discipline, clarity, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. But the reward is worth it, a life lived intentionally with purpose and meaning. And isn't that what we're all striving for? The boundary of emotional responsibility is one of the most profound and challenging boundaries to set, yet it is absolutely essential for living a balanced and fulfilled life. Emotional responsibility begins with a simple but powerful truth: you are responsible for your emotions and others are responsible for theirs. It sounds straightforward, but how often do we violate this boundary? How often do we take on the emotional burdens of others, attempting to fix their problems, soothe their anger, or alleviate their sadness, even at the expense of our own well-being? And how often do we, in turn, project our emotional turmoil onto others, expecting them to fix what only we can address? This is a boundary that many of us struggle with because emotions are deeply intertwined with our relationships. We care about people, and that makes it hard to watch them struggle. When someone close to us is upset, we want to help. But there's a difference between supporting someone and taking responsibility for their feelings. When you cross that line, you risk losing yourself in the process. Let's consider what happens when this boundary is absent. Imagine a friend comes to you upset about a decision they've made that has backfired. They're full of regret and self-blame, and in their frustration they lash out at you, accusing you of not helping them enough or not warning them about the potential consequences. If you take responsibility for their emotions, you'll immediately feel the need to fix things. You might apologize even if you've done nothing wrong. You might go out of your way to make them feel better, even if their reaction is unreasonable. Over time, this dynamic can become exhausting. You find yourself walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate their emotional state and adjust your behavior to prevent conflict. In doing so, you abandon your own emotional health. The truth is, no one can fix another person's emotions. Emotions are deeply personal experiences, shaped by an individual's thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions. While you can offer support, understanding, and empathy, you cannot take responsibility for how someone feels or how they choose to respond to a situation. When you try to, you not only exhaust yourself, but you also rob the other person of the opportunity to grow. Taking responsibility for someone else's emotions sends the message that they are incapable of managing their own feelings, which undermines their agency and resilience. At the same time, setting this boundary doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others' emotions. It's not about saying your feelings are your problem, not mine. Emotional responsibility is about finding a balance, offering empathy and support without taking on the weight of someone else's emotional state. It's about understanding where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. Let's turn the lens inward. Are you taking responsibility for your own emotions, or are you expecting others to do that work for you? This is equally important. Think about the times you've been upset and directed that frustration outward. Maybe you blamed a friend for not being supportive enough or criticized a partner for not making you feel valued. In these moments, you placed the burden of your emotional state on someone else. But the hard truth is this: no one can make you happy, secure, or fulfilled. That is your job and yours alone. When you place your emotional well-being in someone else's hands, you give away your power. You become reactive, dependent on how others behave or what they say. If they disappoint you, and they inevitably will, because no one can meet all your needs, you feel hurt, angry, or abandoned. But if you take ownership of your emotions, you regain control. You acknowledge that while others may influence how you feel, the ultimate responsibility lies with you. This doesn't mean you ignore your emotions or suppress them. It means you face them head on. You ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What thoughts or beliefs are contributing to this emotion? What can I do to address it constructively? Setting the boundary of emotional responsibility also means recognizing that emotions are signals, not dictators. They provide valuable information about your needs, desires, and values, but they don't have to control your actions. When you take responsibility for your emotions, you learn to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This can transform your relationships. Instead of lashing out in anger or withdrawing in sadness, you can communicate your feelings in a way that fosters understanding and connection. But make no mistake, this is hard work. It requires self-awareness, humility, and practice. It requires you to step back from the immediate intensity of your emotions and evaluate them objectively. And it requires courage, because taking responsibility for your emotions means letting go of blame. It means accepting that you are the architect of your emotional experience, even when life feels unfair or overwhelming. The reward, however, is worth it. When you set this boundary, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of trying to control how others feel or allowing their emotions to control you. You build healthier, more balanced relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. And most importantly, you cultivate a sense of inner peace, knowing that you have the tools to navigate your emotional world with strength and grace. So the next time you find yourself caught in the emotional storm of a relationship, whether it's with a partner, friend, colleague, or even yourself, pause. Ask yourself, am I taking responsibility for something that isn't mine? Or am I expecting someone else to carry the weight of my feelings? The answers to those questions will guide you toward the boundary of emotional responsibility, and in doing so, they will guide you toward freedom. The boundary of influence is one of the most defining aspects of a person's life. It is about choosing deliberately and consciously who and what you allow to shape your thoughts, beliefs, and actions. We live in a world saturated with voices from social media, news outlets, friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers. Each of these voices carries with it a message, an agenda, a worldview. If you don't set boundaries around the influence you permit in your life, you risk becoming a passive participant in your own story, shaped not by your own values and aspirations, but by the noise of the world around you. The question is, what are you consuming? Because make no mistake, everything you consume, whether it's information, entertainment, or conversation, has an impact. It shapes your perception of the world, your sense of what's possible, and even your beliefs about yourself. If you allow negative, cynical, or shallow influences to dominate your mental space, you'll find your thoughts reflecting that same negativity. The mind, after all, is like a sponge. It absorbs whatever it's exposed to. But unlike a sponge, you have the power to choose what you let in. To set this boundary, the first step is awareness. Take stock of the influences in your life. Whose voices are you listening to? What content are you consuming on a daily basis? What environments are you spending your time in? Be honest with yourself. Are these influences uplifting you or dragging you down? Are they encouraging you to grow, to strive, to aim higher? Or are they feeding doubt, fear, and mediocrity? This kind of self-reflection can be uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the fact that you may be allowing toxic influences into your life. But it's a necessary discomfort if you want to take control of your narrative. Now, once you've identified the influences in your life, the next step is to decide which ones are worth keeping and which ones you need to let go. This can be challenging, especially when the negative influences come from people you care about. It's not easy to set boundaries with a friend, a family member, or a colleague whose negativity or criticism affects you deeply. But remember, this setting boundaries isn't about cutting people off or being unkind. It's about protecting your mental and emotional well-being so that you can show up as your best self, not just for you, but for the people who depend on you. Let's talk about the media for a moment. We live in an era of constant connectivity where news cycles run 24/7 and social media algorithms are designed to keep us scrolling endlessly. But here's the thing, most of this content is not designed to inform you, uplift you, or help you grow. It's designed to grab your attention, often by appealing to your fears, anxieties, or insecurities. If you're not careful, you can easily find yourself overwhelmed by negativity, drawn into outrage, or numbed by an endless stream of trivial distractions. Setting boundaries with the media means being intentional about what you consume and how much time you spend consuming it. It means asking yourself, is this adding value to my life? Is this helping me become the person I want to be? If the answer is no, it's time to change the channel, log off, or turn the device off altogether. The same principle applies to the people you surround yourself with. Jim Rohn famously said, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." Whether or not the number is exact, the sentiment is true. The people around you have a profound influence on your mindset, habits, and choices. If you're constantly surrounded by people who complain, settle for less, or discourage ambition, it's only a matter of time before you start mirroring those attitudes. On the other hand, if you surround yourself with people who challenge you, inspire you, and hold you accountable, you'll find yourself rising to meet their level. But here's the catch: you don't always have the luxury of choosing who you spend time with. Maybe it's a coworker, a family member, or someone else you can't avoid. In these cases, the boundary isn't about physical distance, it's about mental distance. You can acknowledge their presence without letting their negativity influence you. You can listen without internalizing their criticism. This requires a level of emotional discipline, but it's a skill worth developing. Finally, don't forget the influence you have over yourself. The things you say to yourself, the thoughts you entertain, and the standards you set for your behavior all play a role in shaping who you are. If your inner dialogue is harsh, critical, or defeatist, you'll find it difficult to achieve anything meaningful. On the other hand, if you speak to yourself with kindness, encouragement, and honesty, you create an internal environment that fosters growth and resilience. Setting boundaries around your self-talk is just as important as setting them with external influences. In the end, the boundary of influence is about taking responsibility for your mental landscape. It's about recognizing that while you can't control everything you're exposed to, you can control what you allow to take root in your mind. When you set this boundary, you reclaim your agency. You become the architect of your own life, not a product of external forces. And that, my friends, is how you build a life of integrity and meaning. The question is, will you choose to set this boundary, or will you allow the world to shape you without your consent? The choice is yours and the power is yours. Use it wisely. The boundary of self-worth is among the most crucial yet overlooked aspects of personal growth. It is the invisible line that defines how you allow others to treat you and how you treat yourself. It is not just about saying, "I deserve respect." It's about embodying that belief in every interaction, every choice, and every decision you make. When you set boundaries around your self-worth, you communicate to the world and to yourself that you recognize your inherent value and will not tolerate anything that diminishes it. Unfortunately, many people struggle with this boundary because they confuse self-worth with external validation. They seek their value in the opinions of others, in their achievements, or in their social status. But the problem with external validation is that it is fleeting and unreliable. The same people who praise you today might criticize you tomorrow. The accomplishments that bring you pride in one moment might feel hollow the next. If your sense of worth is tied to these external factors, you'll find yourself on an emotional roller coaster, constantly chasing approval and avoiding rejection. True self-worth is intrinsic. It is not something you earn, it is something you recognize. It is the understanding that your value as a person is not determined by what you do, what you own, or what others think of you. It is rooted in the simple fact that you are a human being, deserving of dignity, respect, and love. This is not arrogance or entitlement, it is a healthy, grounded sense of self-respect. But recognizing your worth is only the first step. Protecting it requires setting boundaries that safeguard your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. One of the most important boundaries around self-worth involves how you allow others to treat you. Too often, people tolerate disrespect, neglect, or mistreatment because they fear confrontation or rejection. They stay in toxic relationships, endure demeaning behavior, or accept less than they deserve because they've been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries makes them selfish or difficult. But the truth is, allowing others to mistreat you doesn't just harm your self-esteem, it reinforces the idea that you're not worthy of better treatment. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you send a message to yourself and to the world that your boundaries are negotiable. Setting this boundary requires courage, especially if you've been conditioned to people please or avoid conflict. It might mean having difficult conversations, standing up for yourself, or even walking away from relationships that no longer serve you. This is not easy. and it might feel uncomfortable or even painful in the short term. But in the long run, it is one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself. When you set clear boundaries, you create space for healthier, more respectful relationships where your worth is recognized and honored. Equally important is the boundary you set with yourself. How do you treat yourself? Are you your own harshest critic, constantly berating yourself for not being good enough? Or do you speak to yourself with kindness, compassion, and understanding? The way you treat yourself sets the tone for how others treat you. If you don't respect yourself, it's unlikely that others will. If you don't believe in your own worth, you'll struggle to enforce boundaries with those who undermine it. This boundary also extends to the standards you set for your life. What do you tolerate in your environment, your habits, and your choices? Are you settling for mediocrity because you don't believe you deserve more? Or are you striving for excellence because you recognize your potential? Setting boundaries around your self-worth means refusing to settle not just in relationships, but in every area of your life. It means holding yourself accountable to your goals and aspirations because you believe you're capable of achieving them. At its core, this boundary is about self-acceptance. It's about acknowledging your flaws and imperfections without letting them define you. Too often, people fall into the trap of believing that self-worth is conditional, that they'll be worthy once they lose weight, get a promotion, or achieve some other milestone. But this is a never-ending cycle. If your worth is conditional, you'll always find another reason to withhold it from yourself. True self-worth is unconditional. It is the understanding that you are enough as you are, even as you strive to grow and improve. Of course, setting boundaries around self-worth doesn't mean isolating yourself or shutting others out. It's not about building walls, it's about creating healthy frameworks for interaction. When you value yourself, you're better equipped to value others. When you respect yourself, you set the standard for how others should treat you. And when you protect your self-worth, you inspire others to do the same for themselves. Ultimately, this boundary is about reclaiming your power. It's about stepping out of the shadows of doubt, fear, and insecurity and stepping into the light of confidence, self-respect, and authenticity. It's about recognizing that your worth is not something to be negotiated, questioned, or diminished. It is something to be celebrated, honored, and protected. And when you live with this understanding, you don't just change your own life, you change the way others see and interact with you. You become a person who commands respect not through force or demand, but through the quiet, unwavering assurance of your own worth. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful boundary of all. In the end, setting boundaries is not about building walls to keep others out. It's about creating a framework that allows you to thrive. It's about understanding who you are, what you stand for, and what you need to grow into the best version of yourself. Boundaries are the guardrails of a meaningful life, protecting your time, your energy, your emotions, and your sense of self-worth. They empower you to take responsibility for your choices while respecting the autonomy of others. When you establish the boundary of time, you reclaim your life from distractions and align your actions with your highest priorities. When you set emotional boundaries, you honor your own feelings without taking on the weight of others' emotional struggles. The boundary of influence ensures that you consciously choose what shapes your beliefs and decisions, filtering out the noise that doesn't serve your growth. And the boundary of self-worth reminds you that you are deserving of respect, love, and dignity not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. These boundaries are not rigid lines, but dynamic practices. They evolve as you grow, as your needs change, and as your understanding of yourself deepens. They require courage to set, discipline to maintain, and wisdom to adjust. But the rewards are immeasurable. When you live with clear boundaries, you create a life of balance, purpose, and authenticity. You free yourself from the chaos of external pressures and stand grounded in your own values. So as you move forward, ask yourself, are you living a life guided by your boundaries, or are you letting others dictate your path? Are you investing in the things that truly matter, or are you spreading yourself too thin? Are you respecting your worth and protecting your peace? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are the key to designing a life that reflects the person you want to be. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect and a declaration of self-worth. It's not about saying no to others, it's about saying yes to yourself. And when you do that, you don't just elevate your own life, you inspire others to do the same. Boundaries are not limitations, they are the foundations of freedom. And in honoring them, you claim the power to live fully, deeply, and authentically.